Okay, hi, I welcome you to the 52 book project. This is another video in that series, and the book that I read this week was by um, Bali Kaur Jaiswal, and it's called The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters. It's a book that I've been meaning to read for a very long time. It's just been in my recommended list on Goodreads, and I the reason I wanted to read it was because it has themes that I can relate to. Firstly, the idea of being Indian but living in another country, being from in the country India and living in another country. I grew up in the Middle East and currently live in Canada, so I really identify with some of the issues of the Indian diaspora. My favorite passage from this book was actually in chapter 11. And I think this summarizes my big takeaway from the book about this longing for home when you stay in another country, and that's my first takeaway from this book. I also want you to, this is from the letter that the mother figure in the book wrote to her three daughters. So I also want you to experience the familiarity of our ancestral state. You girls are British, yes, but all the previous generations of our family lived in India. It is in your blood. The language, the food, the way things are, these things are not erased just because you grew up elsewhere. So, in this book, three sisters um, that live, two of them live in the UK, one lives in Australia. They come together to take sort of a travel pilgrimage in memory of their mother who recently passed away because of an illness. And they haven't really been in the same place as they're all much older. And I think they're in their 30s or 40s, and they all have very busy lives, but this is a chance for them to come together. But all three characters long for this idea of home when they stay abroad, and I think that was there. The second theme that brought me to this book was the idea of grief and using travel to overcome it. Because I went through a personal experience related to losing someone very close to me, I wanted to see how the characters in this book would overcome or have conversations related to grief. And I think fiction's been really helpful in the recent times to help me navigate grief. Fiction and films and podcasts have been my outlet and avenue to understand how to process grief. And in the book, each of the sisters had their own way to deal with grief. Some of them were more confrontational, more explicit with how they felt it. Some of them, kept it within them. Some of them channelized their energy to work. So what I realized that you have to go through grief in a very unique, subjective way. You have to deal with it based on your memory of the individual you have lost and your associations with that individual, and coming to terms with the idea that even though that person is not here in physical reality, they're still present in time and memory. So that was the second theme. I really like this idea of travel, like when you travel to another country or another place, you just get to experience a new reality. And I think that can open up your eyes to different ways of looking at the world. And it can also challenge you to change your perspectives on work, on love, on friendship, on death, on food, on happiness, on culture. So I think travel is a great way to open your eyes to other worldviews. And in this book, the sisters go to three different parts or a couple of different places that their mother tells them to go to. Just a little bit about some of the characters in this book that I want to leave with you. I think Rajini was the oldest sister. I think she faced a lot of pressure being the older sibling. And that's something I notice in a lot of families where there are multiple kids. The older sibling has to take on this role of being responsible. And I think it's the responsibility of the parents and the younger child to look out for the older sibling and give them their space to be vulnerable. Um, And then there was Jasmine and Shireen, who were the younger kids, and they had their own difficulties. Um, I think one of the things I picked up from this book is that sometimes you jump into relationships to overcome past relationships, and that's not very healthy, you know. So, and I felt like some of that was happening with some of the characters in this book. So, I think it's very important to reflect on your life journey and not take decisions based on what happened in the past, rather you should make decisions based on your understanding of what would be the best option for you in a situation. And that can be work, or that can be a romantic relationship. You know, don't take up these things because there is an obligation to be a certain way from a societal perspective. Do it because it aligns with your priorities and highest values. And it is a hit and miss and trial and error process, but over time, I think you get better at making those decisions for sure. And by the end of the book, the three sisters do come to certain realizations, and I don't want to reveal that to you if you do get a chance to read this book. The author has written another book that was also very popular. So, The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters by Bali Kaur Jaswal. And if the author does get a chance to listen to this, I'd love to, share some thoughts and comments with you about my experience and how your book helped me overcome grief in my personal life. Thank you so much for writing this, and thank you to the listeners for coming along in this journey. I've finished um, about 10 to 12 books now, and it's very kind of you to be patiently listening to some of these videos with some of my rants, but also some of my keen observations and insights from the books I'm reading.